The snow was coming down harder than before. Getting caught in the mountains north of Shasta on I-5 during a snowstorm was not something Corey Asher had planned for and certainly didn't want to happen, but things had reached a point where he was going to have to find a place to sit out the duration of the snowstorm. Warm and safe inside his Ford 150, but for how long? He'd already had one instance where he didn't think he was going to get slowed down enough to make the turn. Back in Iowa, if you didn't make the turn, you slid off into a field where you had to call for a tow truck. In this place, if you didn't make the turn, you could end up going off a 1,000-foot drop-off. He needed to find a place to wait out the storm. He was headed for Oregon, where his daughter had a place for him to stay. His son-in-law might not have been a fan of the idea, but in the end he gave in and let her father move into the basement. When he was there, he tried to be gone when weather and funds allowed. He was in the market for a small trailer he could haul behind his pickup, or if necessary behind a car or SUV. The trailer would allow him more time away for the amount of funds he allowed himself. There was more money available, but he had put it towards the house his daughter was living in, which probably was the deciding factor in why or whether he would have been given a place to stay. He had more money coming in, but it was tied up as a piece of land which was contracted to a third party for a couple more years. He planned on using that money to help his daughter further and the rest to invest in hopes of getting an income for the future. If 12 and 13 are the awkward years for kids, and 19 and 20 the ones for the young adults, then surely 60 to 62 were the awkward years for older adults. Perhaps there was one more bump after that, he didn't know. 60 to 62 was terribly awkward because you were too old for anybody to think of as anything else, but you were too young to collect Social Security. If you were asked what you did for a living and you answered unemployed instead of retired, people looked at you like you should be not only working, but at the peak of your career. So if you were living on a tight budget and unemployed, it left you feeling like you should be doing more, which was where he was at now. He knew he still had more to contribute to their future. He didn't want to spend what money he had on providing a place for him to live because as circumstances existed, it was far better for her to have him spend that money on their future and they be a little inconvenienced than for him to spend it on himself. In other words, if he gave them money to invest now, by the time he got the rest of his money in fluid form, they could be well on their way to a secure future. The other way around, and they might be able to save a little bit towards buying a house or towards their future, but as everybody knows, it's very hard to get into a position where you can be saving money if you are still struggling to come up with a down payment on a house. Rent buys the upcoming month and nothing else. A house payment buys the upcoming month and puts away something they can sell years later that will be worth an unbelievable amount of return on the money invested. All that would be proved in time, but if everything went as planned, the money he would have to contribute later down the road wouldn't be nearly as important because what he had sacrificed, and them, he was quite aware that if they didn't make the sacrifices wouldn't happen, so that the money back then had taken a life on its own, and though he didn't know how it would figure out to the math geniuses, he figured it should be in the area of as much as he would have been able to give, so that basically they not only were twice as far ahead but also blessed with the consistent monthly, or yearly, passive income from that money they had to invest back then. A blue sign said something about a rest stop. He forced his mind to stop thinking about his situation back in Oregon and pay attention to the here, near and now. He leaned forward, peering through the near whiteout conditions, trying to find that exit that would get him off the highway before some 18-wheeler came along and forced him into creating his own exit, or worse, simply couldn't stop and ran over him. The memory of the last time he had tried to get across I-80 during the winter time came to mind. The road had been closed due to a big pile-up not a third of the way into Wyoming. He was headed west to Oregon when the road sign stated you couldn't go any further than Cheyenne. He spent 2 days there before they opened the road, and he entered the highway with what seemed like about 1,000 18-wheelers. Corey had never feared winter conditions as much as he did the other guy. In this case, the other guy was always driving an 18-wheeler. To make matters completely insane, and also it explained the big pile-up they had which caused the highway to shut down in the first place. The drivers of the 18-wheelers would literally be right on each other's tail like drivers at rush hour in Houston. He found it sad in an amusing way that they thought it was really going to make a lot of difference at the finish line if they arrived right on top of each other or spread out. The situation was completely crazy. If you are ever caught where the road is closed and you see the number of 18-wheelers building up, it is best to either turn around and find another route or wait until the majority of trucks have already left. Even then you are going to find yourself out in the middle of nowhere surrounded by 18-wheelers which have no problem with getting right on your tail, even though it is quite obvious that if there was cause for having to come to a stop, most likely it would be crushed between two of the big trucks. It seems most people have learned their lesson and either do not travel during the winter months or they go south, which was what Corey had chosen to do. He drove from Wyoming to Texas via western Kansas, then west through the southern states, staying on I-40 until reaching I-5 in Southern California. Now he was just south of Oregon's border and winter had caught him once again. The irony was not lost on his sense of humor. In Wyoming he was about 12 hours from the Oregon border. 2 days later he was again 12 hours from the Oregon border. Now less than an hour away, the frozen plague of the north once again had him pinned down. The exit appeared and then was gone in an instant, but that was all Corey needed to start edging the Ford over, letting it find its way through the sea of whiteness. He was shocked to see, or rather not see, a bunch of semi-trucks lining their side of the rest stop. Then again, after thinking about it, he decided it was surprising to see even the two trucks which were there, to be there. This was mountain territory, so any truck driver with any experience probably made sure to not get caught in this region. It wasn't a long drive through the mountains and was probably quite easy for the truck drivers to gauge their trip so not to get caught in the wrong parts of the road. The two trucks which were there, both were running because neither had allowed the snow to build up on their windshields. He chose to drive down their side of the rest area because it sat lower than the parking lot where the cars were supposed to park. He didn't know for sure what he was going to be up against in the coming 24 to 48 hours, but if things got really bad he wanted to be in the most strategic spot possible. That brought him back around to thinking about his situation back at home. It was exactly the same thing. He wanted his kid to be at the most strategic point possible when he got the rest of his money, because if he knew his kid was going to be okay it would allow him to spend some of that money on himself. He just couldn't have enjoyed it the other way around. He had his mid-aged crisis 10 years previous and got what oats he had left to sown. During that time he kept it within boundaries so he wouldn't be caught without money later, but he misjudged things by 2 years. Regardless, he had planned well enough that it was just an inconvenience rather than an ending to his plans. He had believed the contract which would free his money would be up 2 years sooner than it worked out. He was a firm believer that the date was changed when the Mandela effect happened, and he would never believe it any other way because it just wasn't like him to get such an important date wrong. Changing his mind back to the circumstances at hand, he took notice of the place where he stopped. Several things came to mind immediately about his choice of places to sit out the storm. The rest stop was one of the newer ones. It had some really nice bathrooms and was a 2-story arrangement which had an upper deck and a lower one. Below there were swings for the kids and a separate building which Corey could only assume was a storage building, which perhaps also had some sort of office that could be used. He pulled under one of those solar-powered lights located close to the lower deck and turned off his truck lights. He left the truck running to keep the heater going. A quick glance at the fuel gauge confirmed he had a healthy 3/4 of a tank. Along that line of thinking, he also had a jar of peanut butter and a couple cans of chicken noodle soup rolling around on the passenger side floorboard. He had half a gallon of water also, but that shouldn't be a problem since he was at the rest stop. In the parking lot above, where the cars were supposed to park, there were a couple of vehicles. One looked like it was running, the other he couldn't tell. It was getting hard to even see them, let alone see if they had exhaust. There was already about 6 inches of new snow covering the ground. The wind hadn't been a problem when the snow started, but now it was picking up and already there were drifts forming. Temperature was getting into the single digits and there was still a few hours before darkness, which promised a cold night ahead. Corey had thrown some firewood into the back of his pickup, more for the weight than the wood, but now he was glad he had done it when he saw the opportunity. It wasn't firewood until he cut it into pieces. Formerly it was a dead hardwood, most likely an oak or some sort of nut-bearing tree. It was hard for him to tell once the bark had worn off. If a tree had leaves then he could tell easily, but this time of year he just wasn't experienced enough to know. But it was laying alongside the parking lot of the hamburger joint he had stopped at, and after talking with the manager it was considered a favor if he did cut it up and take it with him. How's that saying go? Luck is a combination of prepared meets opportunity. Well, firewood is one of those things that can be quite costly, or it can literally be free. The ones that get it for free have a chainsaw ready to be used at any time. Corey even managed to pocket a little cash every winter because he would accumulate enough firewood that he could actually sell some and still have all that he needed. What he sold wasn't usually top of the line. In fact, it usually was not even as good as what he currently was carrying. Where he lived there were more pines than anything else, so that was often what kind of wood he had to work with. It burned fast, but if properly dried out it still had value. He had decided to take the firewood even though he was still more than a couple hundred miles from home, because he knew there was a chance he would end up going through the snow and ice, and the next best thing to four-wheel drive is having enough weight in your back end to get through the drifts. Of course you were supposed to have chains when in these parts during the winter months, but he had not been out of Iowa long enough to have had reason to accumulate the chains. Another reason he wanted to get off the highway so badly. The fine for not having chains was severe. He had been out of Iowa long enough to have gained that much knowledge. There were signs that warned of high fines for not having chains. The ones he had seen were the ones along I-80, but it was a safe bet that Northern California was going to get a tidy sum for pissing them off as well. The snow kept up and saw the light leave the world in an icy grasp, and what was left behind was perhaps the most efficient recipe for getting lost in the woods as exists. Darkness and snow plus blowing snow all married together to cause anyone in the midst of it to become disorientated about where things are, and it becomes much easier to miscalculate distances, and then with all the surroundings looking the same, that which you are able to see, it becomes either unrecognizable or it is too common, and in either case the person cannot use what is usually a point of confirmation they are going the right way, so they then have no choice but to keep on. It gets dark in the mountains early, especially in the wintertime. By about 8 p.m. that night, Corey took notice of several things. He had been laying down in the seat of the truck sleeping. Something hit the truck hard enough to cause him to wake up, but when he looked out the truck window he for a split second thought he saw something. No, he didn't see anything. But he did then take notice that according to his gas tank he wasn't going to be able to go all night and still have gas enough in the morning to drive out of there. He had probably used a quarter tank sitting there sleeping for that amount of time. So he was going to have to make other arrangements for staying warm. Another thing he noticed was the area which you entered to reach the bathrooms, which also had some candy and pop machines, was beginning to get a few people gathering in it. They probably were the folks that had parked the cars in the higher parking lot. Sure, they were running out of gas too. The big trucks could sit running all night long and probably not use near the fuel the gasoline-sucking vehicles would use up. Corey decided it was time for him to stop in the bathroom area. He grabbed all the change he could dig out of his armrest and the change from the other side. He had enough for about 2 candy bars. If not for the lights, which were probably solar-powered, he would not have risked leaving his truck to get to the bathroom area. The snow was coming down too thick. The amount on the ground was now probably 2 feet, and there were drifts 4 feet or more. He had to wade through 2 of them despite being close to the steps that led up to the bathroom area. The steps which led up to the lower deck and everything beyond all looked like they had an overgrowth of white mold that had attached itself to everything. The steps and especially the deck was slick, and he more slid across the lower deck than walked. Then came a series of steps which went this way then that, eventually letting out at the upper deck area. It stretched out over the lower deck, and there was a walkway which led up to the bathrooms. When Corey entered the bathroom area, 2 men, both looking in their late 40s and not really dressed for the weather, one wearing a jean coat and the other an orange hoodie, went past him, catching the door before it was allowed to swing shut. Corey turned and watched them walk out to the 2 big rigs. A family of 4, a couple not more than perhaps 22 or 23, and a man about his age remained in the bathroom greeting area. The younger man, the one opposite the younger woman that made up the couple, began to speak to him like they had known each other. "Can you believe those 2? They as much as told us they were going to crawl back in their beds and go to sleep, and that we weren't to wake them up or bother them unless Jesus was back and had mentioned them by name." He shook his head. "Can you believe it?" Corey wasn't sure what to do, so he shook his head in unison. The 2 boys belonging to the family went racing past him with their mom not far behind, yelling at them to stop roughhousing, or they'd be answering to their father, who looked about as interested in punishing the little snot spreaders as he did getting involved in the discussion about whether it was believable that the truckers could be so cavalier. Meantime he eyed the older guy, the one closer to Corey's age, who had a ponytail, and now he could see the man was of Native American descent, possibly one of the local tribes that owned a casino not more than 10 or 12 miles from them. Which he was sure the man could tell you with more confidence than most, that the 10 or 12 miles might have just as well been 1,200 miles on a night like this one. That man was watching over Corey's shoulder, which was the direction the truckers were parked. Corey turned to look at whatever had the man's attention. All he saw was white and snow falling. He could still see the trucks and he could see that they were still running because no snow had built up on their windshields. Their snowless glass windshields caught shimmers of the overhead lights when the snowfall would allow, and they would reflect the light for the few seconds the falling snow would allow, giving the appearance the two trucks were winking at them. The particular item or event which the Native American man found so enthralling was lost on Corey. He turned back and looked at the man in the ponytail with a show of confusion. The expression wasn't lost on the man, and he spoke in a very calm and confident tone. I wasn't able to watch the truck drivers while they made their way back to the trucks because I lost them in the snowfall probably 10 feet after they left this doorway, but I have been able to keep my eye on their trucks. Corey didn't say anything, but he gave a look which relayed the expectation of a further explanation. The man continued in the same calm, confident voice. I still have yet to see the cab lights come on the way they should if someone had climbed back into the big rig. The windshields of both trucks are reflecting back the overhead lights when the snow allows, but I have definitely not seen the cabs light up from the doors being opened. Corey replied, snowstorm is tricky. Can fool anybody. Even those more in tune with Mother Earth are not immune to its cold, unforgiving side. Maybe one of the trucks doesn't have the inner lights working and the guys both got into that one. Or could be they got some sort of mobile paradise loaded up inside their trailers and the two selfish pricks climbed in back to enjoy all the good life to themselves. If I talk about it anymore I might go out there myself and find out. If you know what I mean. We may still get that chance if this snowstorm traps us in here for any sort of extended period. The way that snow is coming down, not to mention drifting, it is starting to look more and more like that could be a possibility. Again he spoke in that calm, confident tone while providing his reply. No, I did not falter in my watch. The truck cabs never lit up. It is possible they could have climbed into the back of one of the trucks, but I doubt that because I don't think you can shut those doors from the inside of the trailer, and it is simply too cold and too windy for anybody to be comfortable inside one of those trailers under such conditions. I don't think they made it back to their trucks. Now the younger man entered the conversation. What do you think happened to them? They are both good-sized men, and based on the attitude I would guess not somebody to mess with. That's why I didn't argue when they said not to bother them. If you think a little snow and some cold temperatures was enough to do those two brutes in, then you're a crazy dude. The old Indian guy just didn't see us all. No foul. Just an honest mistake. That's the more likely explanation. No offense meant, Mr. Tonto. Just saying what everybody else is thinking. It is possible you are correct, of course, but I would bet if you went out there, and were able to make it back, that you would say that I was right. There was nobody in either truck and the back trailers were locked from the outside. No way anybody could be inside them. The man's voice never wavered from its calm, confident tone. My people believe when on the night of the big storm the sky creatures come down from where they live, up where the tree does not grow and has no place it is welcome. They follow the cold when it creeps down the mountain and use the cover of the storm to move among the human beings, picking out the ones foolish enough to venture out while the whiteout remains strong like the wind that drives it. If that is the case, then they will never be seen again, and it is too late for any living being to change their fate. And it is not for any of us to waste energy on their fate because we may well face our own chance to be the sky creature's dinner. You're going to scare the kids if they stop running around long enough to listen. Corey said matter-of-factly. Doing a pretty good job on me. He smiled at the man with the ponytail. He had one of those shit-eating grins which both promised innocent trouble ahead and that you were included if for nothing further than just being a lookout watcher, if you wanted to come along. In fact, it promised inclusion with the guarantee of probable innocence by virtue of falling into the category of innocent bystander. And if he got away with it, then you could feel like you had been in on things all the way up to your neck and had got away with it. Another way to describe his smile would be that it promised the same sort of play as your dad showed when he would be told by mom to stay out of the cookies until after dinner and he would sneak a handful to share with you and any siblings hanging around. If there was any real trouble to come down the pipe, it went straight to the old man, and the kids at worst would get a discouraging look from her. The Native American man liked Corey right as soon as he gave that smile. It was a smile that said racism, sexism and any other kind of ism would not be in his arsenal. Rather, the one requirement to ride this man's train would be a sense of humor and a forgiving nature, because sooner or later it was likely you would be the one everybody else was laughing at. Of course, by then it is likely you will have laughed at him on more than one occasion. The bottom line was, if you took yourself too seriously, then you probably weren't going to like him. That was fine, because he didn't take anything in this life too seriously. He returned the smile and said, "I am called Growler. You can also call me Jackson if that suits you better." Corey Asher. "Nice to meet everyone." He said everyone, but was looking directly at the ponytailed man. "You don't really think something happened to the two truckers, do you? I mean, you have to admit those two wouldn't be the first choice for somebody to get physical with. Right?" It was a rhetorical question. Of course, nothing happened to the two big burly truck drivers that were so tough they were wearing clothing more suited for a Florida night than one here in the Northern California mountains during a whiteout. I wish I could tell you that it is an old wives' tale that I have no belief in whatsoever, but I cannot. While true, I have never seen the sky creatures, they do exist and have been known to kill men and take the women for their own. In our tribe, when there is a blizzard, any man who truly loves his woman will not leave her alone for even a few seconds. The sky creatures are said to ride the screeching winds that form the drifts during the blizzard, and they can snatch your woman and be gone with her in the time it takes to look one direction and then back. I have no cause to doubt the warnings passed down from father to son. Perhaps you are immune because your beliefs do not include such things, but I promise that will not save you if you come face to face with one of them. Out of simple curiosity and the fact he liked listening to the ponytailed man talk, Corey asked the obvious, "What do they look like?" "You know the sky creatures as Bigfoot. Some call it Sasquatch. In Asia it is the abominable snowman, which is most appropriate to our circumstance. It leaves sign only on occasion. The only creature capable of moving across the snow without leaving any footprints, besides the snow hare. That is why it has never been caught. You can track it and the tracks will end without explanation or even a sketchy theory. They just go along and then stop. That is a sky creature. Our people believe they are so much more than just a shy swamp ape. Of course, we base our beliefs on the creatures that come down from the top of Shasta. They are not the same thing as the big ape that stalks the swamps of Arkansas and southern Missouri. They do not like swamps, and they are far from turning over logs for juicy insects. As I mentioned before this storm is done, we may all get the chance to become dinner for one of them. I tell you this as warning not to go out into the storm. Especially alone. The fact that two truckers are no-shows tells me that it probably isn't safe for two men out there. There is no worry then. We aren't going anywhere until the storm is over. The young woman entered into the conversation. Then she took hold of the young man's hand and put her head on his shoulder. "Right, baby?" "Couldn't be more spot on," her boyfriend confirmed. "Don't have to worry about me or any of my family going out there tonight. We're getting ready to make a place to sleep for the night. We have some extra blankets if any of you need something to help keep you warm through the night," the family man said while stepping past Corey to get a closer look out into the snowy night. "I didn't say anything earlier," he said in a quiet voice so that his wife and two boys couldn't hear, "but I was also watching the trucks for them to either catch the overhead lights when the truck doors swung open and reflected back, or to see the inside of the cabs light up when the doors were opened. I never saw either. The only lights or reflections I have seen have been the times the overheads catch the windshields of the trucks at just the right time. I can tell the difference. Those men never have made it to the trucks. I'm going to try and get the kids to sleep and we will talk about it further then. I'm more than a little worried." The Native American man came closer to Corey. "Is that your pickup out there?" "Yes. It might be in our best interest to have you drive the truck right up here to the lower deck. So that if we had to all get in it to get away we could find it. The way the snow is blowing, that might not be possible in another few hours. The back is full of firewood, so not many could get into it." "That's even better. Better than I could have hoped for. I've been looking at that deck for possible fuel for a fire, but it's most likely been treated, so we would be better off not breathing that smoke. But in a pinch I was looking at it. I've also got a chainsaw. We could cut a few long planks and bring them inside so they can start drying out just in case we need them, but this place has heat. Right now. The storm is not weakening. Any time now I expect to lose power. When that happens the lights won't be affected for the most part. Maybe the ones inside this building, but the overheads and the sidewalk lamps are all solar. We will lose what little bit of heat the building offers. I already have a plan for using the firewood. We can use the trash cans as the stove, so all we need to figure out is how to move the smoke outside the building. I might have something we can fashion. Then again, maybe not. Maybe one of those trucks has something we can use? Oh, if it comes down to it, we can take the exhaust off one of them and use it to move the smoke outside. Corey was impressed. He hadn't realized how bad things were, or were going to get, but now he felt confident with this guy's help they would be okay. Wouldn't it be easier to just move everybody to the trucks? You think we could fit everybody in them? 2 in the front of the cab, maybe 3. The sleepers are about the size of a queen bed. How many people can we fit on a queen bed comfortably? I'd guess 3 at best. So figure 3 and 2 is 5 to a truck. There are 4 in the family, 2 is the couple, you and me. 10. So I guess we can go either way. Be crammed into the diesels or turn the bathroom area into a room with a wood-burning stove in it. That's if we lose power. Corey insisted on pointing out. Almost as if it had been waiting for just the right moment, the lights inside the bathroom building began to flicker on and off. Then they went out for about a minute and a half and suddenly came back on. Corey glanced in the direction of the family and saw the boys had already fell asleep. At least they wouldn't go to sleep afraid the lights wouldn't come back on. For 90 seconds Corey didn't think he would enjoy such comfort. When the lights did come back on, Corey, Jackson, Dad and the young couple all huddled together while Mom stayed with the boys. If the 90 seconds did nothing else for them, it gave a good idea of what things were going to be like when the power went out for good, if that should happen. The first thing they learned was that the brightest spot would not be the building they were inhabiting but rather the parking lots and of course the sidewalks, which were lit by the solar lamps. As long as they enjoyed power, the bathroom building was the place to be in the spotlight, but if they lost the lights then the heat would soon be a thing of the past because those little rest stop bathrooms are not made with any sort of insulation involved. In fact, Corey always thought they made them somewhat uncomfortable on purpose, in one manner or another. Whether that was true or not, they clearly did not attempt to provide the sort of atmosphere where a guy brought along a magazine and headphones. These places were made to get people in and then out. This rest stop was actually much better than the older ones. Some of them didn't even have walls that stretched from floor to roof, which meant the cold wind blew in under the stalls. Most the older ones didn't have any sort of heat in them. Many didn't have an enclosed waiting room which you could then enter the bathrooms from it. Corey's mother said they were little more and little better than a well-filled-in bush or tree to squat behind. Looking out the window at the blowing snow and the ever larger drifts that were evolving, he felt lucky to be at one of the newer rest stops because things could have been so much worse. I agree I should bring my truck up to the deck stairs. I'm going to get it now. If you want to keep an eye, Corey said, then hesitated and was grateful to be interrupted by Jackson. I've got you. Go straight to your truck. Don't bother looking back or around. It won't do you any good and it only increases the chances you get lost in the whiteout. What's your phone number, bud? Corey gave him the number but was skeptical whether it made any difference because he wasn't all that sure that there was service where they were at, plus what good would it do if they did have service? Was he going to get a call to tell him he was lost in the whiteout? Or to suggest which way he should go if he became lost? It was an effort made of show and not of substance, but he appreciated the gesture since it at least made him feel like he wasn't alone. You couldn't see his pickup from the bathroom building, but you could see the overhead light it was parked under. The light was a brighter spot in the whiteout than not, but you couldn't actually see the light fixture. Just the glow it gave off. According to the Weather Channel, when the temps reached single digits and the wind was blowing 30 miles an hour or more, it was just a short 15 to 30 minutes before frostbite. Corey had no intention of being out there for that long. Looking out the window of the bathroom building, the whiteout looked bad. Nobody in their right mind would have went out into the dark white if they didn't have 2 and 3 steps off the lower deck steps, and Corey was already beginning to regret his decision. He could have waited until it was proven to be necessary for him to take this risk, but there was a part of him that embraced the challenge, and if he ran into the abominable snowman, well, he would cross that bridge when it was proven to exist. You know what he did know to exist? Bad guys. Bad circumstances and bad decisions. This was a bad circumstance. He didn't want to add bad decisions to the list. Waiting until later might have proved much more troublesome. When the power goes out, it is possible there will be some panic involved. He figured he was probably better off venturing into the wild white during a period of calm rather than when everybody is less focused than otherwise. That's when the bad guy may make an appearance. So he would make the journey now. Drifts were everywhere, and some were now 4 feet. He pushed his way through the ones which were not easy to walk around, and sooner than he expected he was at his truck. He very nearly walked right into it. The Ford fired up, and Corey was grateful. American-made vehicles had not always treated him so kindly. If he had been in his Honda, he might have tried to drive his way out of this mess back when it was just starting. Driving the Ford, which didn't have 4-wheel drive, the possibility was non-existent. The firewood in the back for extra weight. It had only a few seconds of hesitation while making the way over to the steps of the lower deck. The few seconds were spent tires spinning in something slick, and it wasn't until he got out of the truck that he saw the backside was a striking pink against the usual white of his pickup. The pink was just around the back wheel fenders. When he stuck his finger into it, the impression was that it was blood he had driven through. Blood that wasn't yet dried or frozen, which meant it more than likely came from the only possible source, the truckers. One might have cut the other, or maybe even shot him. Hell, the wind was blowing that way, away from the buildings. Between that and the snow falling at such a rate, it was possible a gun could have been discharged without them hearing it. Shit. Did he run over the guy? Was the guy left laying in the snow to die, and then he came along and finished the job? Maybe the guy was still alive? The snow continued to fall and be blown across the landscape. Corey was aware of the fact that if he wanted to backtrack and look for whatever he ran over or through, that he was going to have to do it right then. Even so, the time he had to find his tracks would be diminished. But he had to try. It didn't cross his mind that the person or thing that caused the tragedy was still probably in the area. Of course, he also had a bigger risk. Getting lost in the whiteout and not being able to find his way back to the compound. He could literally die only yards from salvation. He reached behind the seat of the Ford and brought out a spool of fishing line. Next, he took some wire and managed to connect the spool to the back bumper so that it would easily allow him to take the end of the fishing line and walk into the white and still be able to find his way back. He didn't go very far before it became evident that between the falling snow and that which was blowing, that he had almost no chance of finding the spot where the truck had picked up the blood. The whiteout was just too strong. Corey tried to pick out his location by looking around him, and he realized everything was just a cold, blowing white wall of dancing, falling, sprinting ice flakes that took no special direction in their avalanche and were infinite in quantity and resolve. He was wearing a puffy winter coat filled with down and blessed with a good hood that he had tied so that he could barely see what was right in front of him. A few seconds were spent thinking this must be how the horses feel when they put the blinders on them. In one hand he held the fishing line. As he began to pull the line tight so that he could follow it back to warmth equals life, it was not lost on him that this fishing line was literally his lifeline. The line went tight and then it went slack again. He felt a shock of panic race through his insides, and as strong as it was, despite it screaming into his head to run. Race for your life. He resisted the urge and forced himself to stay calm and think. Okay, he knew which direction to start heading thanks to the line going tight before things went to hell. Corey tried to peer through the whiteout in search of some glow from one of the sidewalk lamps or perhaps the bathroom building. There was only more blizzard. He kept working his way toward the direction he thought he needed to go. Now he wasn't trying to get around the drifts. Too much opportunity for getting off track in his direction. He just got through a rather difficult drift when he stumbled on something. Something that was round and hard. What the hell was out here in the parking lot, assuming he was still in the parking lot, that was round and about the size of a basketball? He stepped backwards and felt the thing with his foot. He felt down into the snow with his hands and found the thing. As soon as his hand had touched it for more than a passing second, he knew what it was even through the feel of the gloves he wore. The snow continued to pour around him, but now he was in a separate place. Time had stopped. He no longer felt the cold, or the snow falling into his face, even the wind, which was relentless, went unnoticed. He was entirely engulfed in the circumstance of what he had stumbled over. What he had then found while reaching into the snow. What he knew he was going to see if he lifted that round thing up to his face. Looking down through that hole his hood, his blinders, had created. His own special viewing hole, which only allowed him to see what was right in front of him. What was going to be looking back at him when he did? He didn't have to ask what. The proper word or expression would be to ask, who? In the end, he didn't look. Practical even under pressure or panic, Corey concluded that he was only going to further freak himself out by looking at the head. It would have made it infinitely more impossible for him to hold on to the head so that he could bring it back to the compound, assuming he was able to find it. It was almost certain to be one of the truckers. He held it as loosely as possible without losing grip and proceeded towards where he hoped his truck and the stairs leading up to the bathroom building would be waiting. The temperature was brutal, but inside his puffy winter coat Corey felt as warm as if it were a summer night. He assumed he was running on almost pure adrenaline, which explained his immunity to the freezing temp. He continued trying to stay in as straight a line as possible. Had he missed the truck and lower deck? Out of the corner of his eye something came at him fast and he was knocked off his feet. He thought he heard a growl, and the next thing he knew his arm was being grasped and he was raised to a standing position. Still holding the severed head, he was in the act of beginning to swing it like a weapon when Growler Jackson spoke in that calm, confident voice. It seemed to be unaffected by the raging blizzard, and Corey heard him as though they were still inside the bathroom building looking out the window at all the chaos. "You okay?" "Yes," Corey shouted in reply. "Let's get upstairs. Don't freak out, but when I was walking in the parking lot, I found this." "Him." Corey held the head so that Jackson could see it. To Corey's surprise, the reaction was hardly one at all. If the table had been turned, there was about an 80% chance he would have screamed like a little girl and went running back up the stairs to the bathroom building, where he would have told everyone not to let the crazy bastard with the severed head in. "Damn. Don't see that every day." Now Jackson's voice was raised. "Doesn't take much to get you excited, does it?" Corey thought. "Blizzard whiteout. No problem." Severed head, voice raised. "Pretty high bar." Instead of saying what he was thinking, he replied, "Was I right to bring it back with me? I know we can't bring it inside where the kids and females are, but if it had been a complete body, it wouldn't have been right to just leave it laying in the parking lot, so I..." "Relax, buddy. You're probably in shock, at least a mild version. Hell, I probably am too now. But we do need to get out of here and back to better shelter. Whatever did that to him is still roaming, and I would like to not be here when it or he shows up. I still need to grab some stuff out of my truck. Won't take but a second." He reached into his truck and grabbed some things he thought they might need, including a hammer/hatchet and some nails. "Planning on remodeling the bathrooms?" Growler asked. Corey shook his head yes and motioned for Jackson to lead the way. They waded through the knee-deep snow that had settled on the lower deck over to where the stairs did their this way and then that way style of climbing up to where the bathroom building was located. Once back inside the building, the difference in temperature really hit home with Corey. He didn't realize how cold he had been until getting back inside. A couple of minutes passed and what were previously numb fingers and hands began to get feeling back in them. It felt like a million needles were being poked through his flesh. He went to the bathroom and ran cold water over them in an attempt to stop the needles. He had no idea if it was a help or made things worse, but eventually, after spending time with his hands under his arms, they did regain their normal feeling. He couldn't have missed frostbite by more than a few minutes. If Growler hadn't shown up and got him refocused, he might have wasted enough extra time so that he did end up with a serious case of frozen appendages. When he got back outside of the men's room, the young couple were speaking with Growler, and the older couple who had the kids were sitting down near where the boys slept and looked like they were about to sleep themselves. The lights continued to flicker, but so far the power had not again been lost. Outside, just out of sight of being obvious, was the snow-covered blanket that was used to wrap around the severed head. It had been confirmed by both Growler and the young man, who couldn't believe the truckers could have such an attitude that the head did indeed belong to one of them. When Corey got back within earshot of the conversation, he heard the young couple saying how that from what they had observed the two truck drivers were close. The young woman said she thought she had heard them refer to the same mom, which, unless they were Cain and Abel, lent a lot of weight toward the fact that the one trucker had not killed the other. That it was more likely the other trucker was either dead or hurt somewhere not terribly far from their location. Corey entered the conversation, asking Growler to elaborate on the sky creatures. He thought he heard a trickle of pride riding among all that calm and confidence when he received his reply. "They've been before us. It is predicted they will be here after us. They and their ways are as unchanging as is the tide. They are called the sky creatures because they live so far up on the mountain. Above the tree line is reserved for them. My people never would go above the tree line for any reason. It is said that the sky creatures live in two worlds. That for the most part this world is like a bus station where they sometimes have to wait before they can catch the next train. The times when they are experiencing a layover is the times when they are most often spotted. A few of them like it here and spend most their time here, but the majority of them do not." Corey interrupted. "Why would they attack us? Why did my people hunt buffalo? Because they are tasty and easier to catch and kill than, say, a mountain goat or an elk. Do you have any idea how many people per year come up missing just in the United States?